Hello, this is Wyatt Jackson from Wyatt Jackson Story Design. So now people have been asking me off and on over the last few months, what is story design? Where did it come from? And how did you come up with the idea, the notion of story design? So the answer is complex, but I'll make it simple by saying that really my dad, back when I was in my single digits up to maybe 12 or so, we would see a movie. Or I would watch a movie and then I would talk about how great the movie was, or he would, come with me to the movies and we would talk about it. And then he would always ask me, so what do you think happens now with the characters now that the story is over that we saw? Like, or who directed this film? Who wrote it? He would ask me questions like that. And so I didn't think about it at the time, but on a very deep level, he was asking me a lot of questions that had to do with planting a seed about storytelling and about crafting story and designing stories. Now that was coming to me at a young age when I was enjoying cartoons and movies and cartoons like The Phantom Toll Booth and Star Wars and all those things that were going on back then. And he would always ask me those questions. So at an early age, I started understanding story just from that dialogue and those questions with my dad. It wasn't until I got into my teens that I started really delving into theater with the Boston Youth Theater under the direction of Dr. Elaine Corey. Now, she was my theater teacher in high school, and we did everything from social justice plays to understanding culture, understanding who you are. We did it all. And it was a theater troupe that was based in Boston who hired a lot of kids from different diverse neighborhoods, like Dorchester, Roxbury, Mattapan, Newton, East Boston, Charlestown, you name it. These, different boroughs of Boston. And so we got a chance to learn a lot about youth culture in our city, but also narratives that were really important. Finished that up around 1987. My mother passes away, and then I, through the tutelage of Diane Walker, famous tap dancer, became like a surrogate mother of mine. She got me ready for Broadway with a show that I auditioned for called Body and Soul. Made it in that show, very big deal. It's a Broadway-based musical that went to Europe, toured there for about a year, and it had everybody in it. All these black Broadway stars. It had Maman Chance in it, the Swiss silent theater troupe. It had George Faison, Graciela Danielle, and Mercedes Ellington as the choreographers. And I had a ball learning the culture and learning how musical reviews are put together. I studied, I watched how Andre Heller worked with George Faison, the choreographer, and how he worked with the other choreographers. I watched how the dancers adapted and the singers and everybody adapted to this work. Who was also a part of that was Keith Haring, pop artist, famous pop artist. Got a chance to work with him. Roy Lichtenstein, another pop artist, and Jean Basquiat. They were the artists that gave their artwork for the show. So it was an immersive art experience before the digital stuff and all. And we were able to be right in the middle of that collaborative process with these giants. When I come away from that tour, I have a whole other way of viewing musical reviews, theater, you name it. And I got signed to a record label at that time. When I came back with a guy named Derek Quest, we called ourselves Here and Now, and we got signed to Warner Brothers under the direction of actor Michael Douglas. He had a record label called Third Stone Records. And so we brought theater to that whole context. We were in the music industry pretty much doing like vaudeville type hip hop, telling stories and having fun, and he would sing and I would rap and we would dance. And we did that all over the country. We did that with BET and MTV and VH1 and worked with some amazing producers, one of whom I'm still working with now by the name of Ken Rubin. So fast forward to then going back on the road with another Broadway musical, Black and Blue. I then get in the touring company of Black and Blue after it did a Broadway run. And I go back to Europe. I go back to Paris and Germany and so on. And I do all that work for a while, come back from that, and the director of that show, Claudio Segovia, then wanted to circle back with me and work with me on a show that he was developing on hip hop. Called Diane to arrange for me to come to New York, hung out with him for 3 days, discussing what a hip hop musical review would look like on Broadway. That was eye-opening for me because it made me see, wait a minute, why is this heavyweight, Tony Award-winning, huge director asking me from Boston to come and work with him on developing a show? Not soon after that, George Faison circled back with me and asked me to help him develop some things and also be in a show that he was doing. He wanted me to be a part of that team. So now a pattern started to arise where I saw that these heavyweight Tony Award-winning producers and directors would call me and ask me to come to New York and work with them on projects. Then finally, the one that really convinced me something was going on was Floriana Frassetto from Mama Shantz, one of the co-founders. She asked me to come to New York and talk with her about developing a new show that would have urban sensibilities, modern, new type feels to it with her work as a mime artist. So it all started to click when she asked me, and I thought about Claudio asking me, I thought about George asking me, and I thought about what is it that I have? And I'll go back to this notion of telling stories, seeing from a different perspective with vaudeville and hip hop and all the theater stuff. So I said, in order to get that edge, I need to go back to school. So here in Boston, we have a very powerful college scene, academic scene, art scene. So I was able to go to Lesley University and get up under their creative arts department and learn the craft of storytelling from a different perspective, where you organize ideas in a different way than just being a part of a show. So I learned what it meant to devise scenes, understand context, understand the different conventions of theater. Then I go over to UMass Boston and take some courses over there in the midst of all the work I was doing with Lesley, and got up under the work of Professor Daniel Gedron, an Israeli Shakespearean director who also is a fantastic teacher. So I learned directing from him, and I learned Shakespeare and why understanding context is really important. Really got into that work. Did a lot of work with him at UMass Boston. Come out of that, get my degree in theater arts, and then I go into a graduate program that was housed at Harvard called the PSI Center for Creativity and Scholarship, and that was under the direction of Dr. Linda Nathan and the late Carmen Torres. And that's when everything clicked. Because now I'm seeing in real time that there is a need for stories to be designed that are not the typical Broadway bound, which isn't a bad thing, but not the typical Broadway bound musical theater. This is how we're going to do it, formulaic thing. You can do something different. So all of that experience that I had as a young person, and all of that work with George and Floriana and Claudio and all the other hip hop and all of it started to add up as story design and the performing and media arts. What we understand is that design thinking is about empathy for your audience, empathy for the client, understanding what the client or the audience is feeling or what they're dealing with. And then, of course, storytelling is all of that, making sure that there's a narrative, there's an arc, there's a theme, there's a message that's being communicated through characters and scenes and all the other stuff. So I started blending those two worlds together with all the experience, with all of the backdrop of hours of in the studio having a good time with all kinds of artists. Keeping my expectations realistic about working with people and collaborating. Understanding that, New York is a space, and LA is a space, and of course London and Paris and all those spaces have their value, all of which I've worked in. So I started adding it all up. All added up to story, design, and the performing and media arts. The book comes out next year. We're right now producing 2 shows. One is We Move in Color. It's going to be at the Kennedy Center 2024. And we have a tour that's being put together now for that. And then another project that I have yet to talk about to the public. But these are the things we're working on. And I'm very, very grateful. And so that gives you a sense of what this is all about.